Let's get interesting things to talk about. And there are plenty of interesting things to talk about over this past week. And I think that they all fit with something we discussed and all be understood considerable length, certain framings last year over to lay out those framings 6 or 7 months leading up to the and first I want to begin, and that is whether or not people wanted to get the hose again. And it seems like people do want to get the hose again. And what I meant when I said that is stuff like we've been seeing. People thought that we were going to be to the end of the project as long as we could get Trump to quote unquote win a fake election. And it was a fake election. There was no chance that the outcome would have been any different on the presidential level. They could not have communicated anything differently on the presidential level and had the country go along with it and agree with it and accept it. It was bad enough in 2020 when they did it with Biden, failed. Okay. More people over time disbelieved in Biden's legitimacy. That's all you need to understand to know that the project failed. That erodes confidence in the regime and in the unipart. And that is the purpose of the narrative op. It's to fortify the regime effort and diminish the anti-regime effort. Okay. And so obviously from the anti-regime side, our effort is to fortify the anti-regime argument and diminish the regime in people's minds. Okay. It's a narrative battle to win the collective consciousness about these issues. Okay. And we can do that quickly if people want to change their minds quickly. And if people are willing to put their egos aside and be humble and admit that they've been wrong about basically all of it. Okay. I mean, I'm writing finally the long piece that I've intended to write for 3 years called The Joy of Having Been Wrong. And it's about just eventually understanding, okay, I was operating in a false paradigm, which means that anything from that paradigm is probably wrong. I'm going to assume that I'm wrong about everything. Take nothing as something that I've learned over time that everybody knows, have confidence in those things, build beliefs upon those things. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to assume that every belief that I've ever had might be wrong and then see which ones are able to be built back using only direct evidence, first principles, and sound logic. And it turns out that a lot of your world, a lot of your real world is able to be reconstructed much in the way you saw it before when taking that approach, but by no means all of it. I wouldn't even say most of it. And the part that can't be rebuilt on the basis of direct evidence, first principles, and sound logic, well, that's a false reality. Okay. Because if it was part of an actual reality, it would present itself again in reality. It would be substantiated in reality when looking only at reality and not responding to any of the cultural forces, any of the stories, any of the incentives to repeat the stories. You can just get rid of all of it. And when you get rid of all of it and you take that humble approach, well, then all of a sudden the learning process about everything begins as though you're a child. And some might say as though you're born again, and you begin to realize that the world is not how you thought it was. In fact, it's this other way that is much more understandable and therefore much more fulfilling, satisfying. It allows you to move forward confidently because your understanding of reality is now coming into alignment with the reality as it exists. Okay. And that's always going to be better for operating in reality. And so we can try to take the fast path toward that by doing it all at once, admitting, hey, man, I was wrong about all this. I was wrong about the most superficial level stuff. I was wrong about the most fundamental level stuff. And all that matters is that I understand that none of these things can be taken as a given anymore. And I'm going to have to, about each and every claim, be humble, leave room for mystery and uncertainty about everything, and then work your way back. Direct evidence, sound logic, first principles. If we fail to do that, we are going to, by virtue of this project, insofar as we understand it, we are going to have to go through these repetitive cycles, these reruns after reruns after reruns, rug pulls after rug pulls, because we keep standing on the rug. And we're going to continue to get rugged until we remove all of those beliefs that are based in the false reality. And there are a lot of incentives in the false reality. We talk about this often. Okay. People respond to social incentives. They want credit online. They want credit in their workplace, maybe with their family, okay, their friends. You get additional leverage if you're the one that knows what's going on. A lot of people have this sparring with the people close to them in life, where one person is arguing for blatant evil and the other person's arguing against that. Okay. And I understand that in the inversion, they think that we are arguing on behalf of evil. They are never able to make that argument, but they believe that. They tell themselves that. We should not be in a relationship where the two views are equal. The evil view has become equal to the view that is not evil, the view that reflects reality, the view that is not a lie, like the evil view would necessarily be. We cannot just act like those things are equal, and we shouldn't engage the conversation as though they are. Someone promoting evil is operating on behalf of the enemy or the adversary, or however you think of it. And it doesn't mean that we try to kill them or try to harm them or anything. It just means that we understand the conversation differently than we've understood it before, which is, oh, you have your opinion, I have mine. I guess we can't settle what the proper opinion is. We can't come to terms and we can't agree. So therefore, we just have to call them both equal. They're not both equal. Okay. We have to be able to get to the right decision on all of these issues, understanding that our prior beliefs about all of these things could be wrong. And so we let them go and we begin to operate in the world in a different way with an open mind, focused on direct evidence, first principles, and sound logic. And where does that get us? Well, it gets us somewhere else. Okay. And if we're unwilling to do that, then we're going to have to be taught these lessons in perpetuity as though we were dogs being classically conditioned. And there's some pretty good indication that that's where we are at this point, because even truthers are unwilling to admit that they don't actually know all the things they pretend to know. And again, that's an epistemological thing. I've been awake for 20 years. Oh, I've studied that. If that is your argument for your rightness, you've studied or you've been around for a while, well, it's not going to serve you very well unless you're around really dumb people and other people who operate only in the false reality. Otherwise, you got to come out and solve the epistemological problem, or else you're going to keep getting the hose again. And people are going to keep getting the hose again, and people are getting the hose again. They are upset by what they see on the screen every day, having just insane reactions, hateful reactions. And then they go out online trying to collect social credits and fiat tokens from strangers that might not even represent real people. That's where we are right now. And everybody just wants to emote. It is a performance. I'm going to have this opinion performatively, and that will let you know that I'm a good person because I have performed properly in response to the stimulus on the television. What I saw on TV made me very mad or very sad or very depressed or very concerned about our future. All of the emotions. And then we go out and we emote online. What are we doing? This is what it looks like to get the hose again. We could have taken the approach last year, sticking to first principles, sticking to direct evidence, sticking to sound logic, and understood that elections are fake. And if elections are fake, then the political process is fake. That's not how leaders are put in place. It's not how they are determined. Okay. The winner is determined prior to the election in a negotiated deal by both sides. That's what it is in a world of fake elections, in a world of illegitimate elections, even if you're not willing to go as far as I am on that claim. Then again, if you know an election is not legitimate, then it ceases to be an election. Okay. Because the definition of election requires the weigh-in from the people involved, which means that their weigh-in has to be counted and recorded and processed and affecting the result in a way that is real and legitimate. If you're not able to meet that standard, then the election is fake. Okay. And if the election is fake, that means there are other things going on. There are more powerful forces in operation than your input into these processes. And at that point, we can understand, well, if there are bigger things going on, and this is not dependent on our direct input into the system, then our direct input into the system is actually not required. What's required is understanding the fakeness, communicating that broadly so that we no longer have fake elections. And you can go down a similar process for almost any issue, but we don't do it. Why don't we do it? Well, because people want to continue receiving social credits and fiat tokens online, and for some people offline, by continuing to support the system as it existed. And there are all sorts of incentives to be collected on our side for doing that, just like there are all sorts of punishments to be meted out on our side for people who do that. Okay. If you go along with the general consensus, the establishment powers, well, then you'll be incentivized. If you go against it, you'll be punished. You'll be censored. You'll be whatever. Okay. At some point, that's just got to be accepted so that we can continue to move on and move forward. Otherwise, it's just the hose again forever. It's just you stand on a rug, it's going to get pulled out from under you forever. And even if we were somehow to get out of that process where we thought, oh, that stuff's not happening anymore, we still would not have broken ourselves out of the circumstance we are in now, which is psyops forever. And I would like to get out of that. Maybe you would. Maybe there's no way out. Okay. I think that there is. And I think it's directly via Jesus Christ. But, that I know is just such a hokey, like old fashioned answer. It's also the new fashioned answer, the emergent trendy answer. And it's going to be obviously a trend. You can see the trend forming over time. It's not going to turn around. It moves in the same direction as everything else. Okay. So we are going that way. But if you can't get out, if it's just two sets of Freemasons psyoping everybody till kingdom come, well, then so be it. We at least have to navigate those psyops and figure out how to avoid being hoodwinked by them rather than signing up for one side of the psyop, pretending we're not getting hoodwinked and help to hoodwink other people on their behalf. And maybe that's where we are, but I would like to think that we are not there. And I think that it is within our power to move past that, which is what I suggest we do. Now, I also want to talk about the idea of narrative disarmament. And I think that that's maybe the right way to describe this. And I want you to go back and think about how the very deadly pandemic was in 2020. Horrifying situation, destroyed many people's lives, countless people's lives, hundreds of millions of people around the world, certainly. Millions of people in the United States lost their jobs, lost their homes, fell into depression, anxiety, addiction, domestic abuse. There was spikes in child abuse, in suicides and murders and everything. It was societally destructive. But at the end of it, we have given up certain misconceptions that we had prior. Misconceptions that because of them, we were able to be manipulated and influenced into doing things that were totally against our interests. And one of those things I would suggest would be the vaccine regime that has been around in this country for 60 years. We just believe that there are these awful diseases out there. If we take these scientific, medical, technological products and inject them into our bodies, we're not going to get that scary disease. And that's what it's all about. That's what health is. Injecting yourself with tons of things so that you don't get diseases you're told about by the television. And so the way that the pandemic process evolved and then the vaccine process evolved, again, there's major losses across the board for humanity. I am not denying that at all. But by the end of it, we are now in a position where the vaccine regime can be ended permanently and where people's fear response to pandemics proposed by the television has been diminished. It's gone away, which means they can't pull that trick again. Okay. That's really important. And I think that we have examples of that over time, right? We just saw a few weeks ago in Israel and Iran that with a story that lasted, I know it was a 12-day war, a story that lasted 10 and a half days, or you could even say one evening, we have moved on from the Iran is going to have nuclear weapons narrative forever. And that is a major chip away at the nuclear weapons narrative broadly. All right. And we see example after example of this sort of thing happening. And I would suggest to you just this week, people are getting red pilled on multiple things. They're getting red pilled on geoengineering for one. Okay. And I'm not saying that that is 100% effective across the board. All right. But it is substantial. It's not some little thing that now that's part of the public conversation. And we're getting to that point down a whole range of issues. And I think maybe that's what it takes. If we're not going to take it upon ourselves to let all of this stuff go and really be honest about what we know, what we can know, and what it means, and to understand how limited that actually is. You know, the Socratic thing, I know nothing, right? That's what made him the smartest person in all of ancient Greece. He knew that he knew nothing. He left everything with its appropriate amount of uncertainty. And when you do that, you can't use worldly arguments to win against moral arguments, okay? Because you're not allowed to do something immoral in order, you say, to potentially enhance worldly benefits. It makes the whole process much simpler. You just become humble about what you know, understand that there are uncertainties about everything, and then figure out which worldly act is moral and effective. It has to meet both standards, okay? It can't just be argued that it's effective. Give us another 50 cents per pack tax on cigarettes, and we will solve the homeless problem for you. What? But nobody ever says what. They're like, okay, well, we got to solve that homeless problem. I guess that's the way to do it. It's better than nothing. And so then it happens, okay? That's retarded. But that's the decision-making process in this country, and it has been, and that's what it is when your mind is not awake. These narratives over time have to get disarmed. If we're not willing to take it upon ourselves to let all of this stuff go and build back from nothing, then we're going to need cycle after cycle of these reruns and rug pulls to get us to let go of our grip on whatever part of the false reality we're afraid to let go of. And, it's funny because a lot of people are very dishonest about the things they actually know, which is, again, very limited. And they're unwilling to go back against that because they have created reputations around being the people who know the things that they don't know. All right. If you're saying that you understand the plan, for instance, you don't. So if you're acting like you do and that you understand how everything is perfectly part of the plan and that everything's in full control, well, you're being a little dishonest. Could it be a different way? Maybe some of them would be like, well, yeah, it could be a different way. I just think it's that. Okay, well, why don't you say that you think it's that and express some uncertainty? Think about what it's like for it to be a different way. Actually live in that belief system and see what it means to believe that thing and whether or not that thing maps onto reality better than the mainstream explanation, which you've accepted. We have to be able to do that. Otherwise, we're going to have this process going on forever. Now, I would suggest narratives are getting disarmed as we go along through this process. So a lot of the negative emotional response over the last few days, some of that's gut instinct. I'm not trying to belittle it. Some of it's gut instinct about things that happen that are wrong. And we don't want to ignore those things. We want to be able to press forward for truth. But it's not only that, it's also an emotional response. And because of that emotional response, in people who are unwilling to go through the process on their own, that emotional process is going to take them through the steps of allowing these narratives in their own minds to be disarmed. All right. And that's going to be a necessary thing. And it's unfortunate, but at least the emotional impact is being delivered. The cognitive dissonance is being delivered so that the conversation sparks up in public and people actually have to think about these things. If that's all that's happening here, you can argue about whether or not it's worth it and whether or not it's moral. Maybe all the stuff should be released right out in front and the chips fall where they may, but that doesn't seem to be the pattern. That doesn't seem to be the strategy. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but it's important to understand the strategy. And if you understand the strategy, if you understand ultimately the awakening, which has to go farther than politics, okay, this all can't be about politics. If it's about politics, then we are just the useful idiots in the partisan scheme to keep us hoodwinked forever. Okay, we are trapped within the controlled opposition dynamic if it's all about electoral politics, especially knowing fake elections. So it's got to be about more than that, which means we have to go further than just a political understanding to a deeper understanding that creates something lasting within us as individuals and within the collective so that we can continue to push forward. That has to happen. So whatever leads to that is good and should be followed as quickly as possible, not shut down by gatekeepers, not shut down in favor of worldly concerns. We should be, no matter what the plan is from the top, we should be charging forward in that direction. Morality demands that we charge forward in that direction. Demanding truth, telling the truth, being honest about what we don't know, okay? Sticking to direct evidence, first principles, sound logic, understanding the system. Even if we just understand what good and evil are and allow that to guide us, that's sufficient. We can figure out how to do the worldly things. The real key is no longer being evil, okay? We have an evil society. We are a fallen race, okay? That's just what mankind is. We have these worldly, superficial, materialistic concerns, and we often prioritize those over our moral concerns, what we are required to do, the things we are required to do. We place the worldly concerns over the moral concerns, okay? And that is the road to ruin, because then we end up justifying as moral things we know to be immoral, or things that we know to be less moral than they should be. And in that, you have the basis for lying. Something you want takes priority over what you should do. That is, again, the road to ruin. We've got to get out of that. And the cognitive dissonance, the catalyst for the emotional response and for that gut instinct that then has to be reckoned with and reconciled, that brings people through the process in a quicker way. So, we've talked on this podcast for years about the creation of chaos and how it is potentially destructive if we are being consistently sold a bill of goods and brainwashed. They create chaos and destabilization. And in the chaos and destabilization, they provide the way out. And it's always to enhance the regime system. How do you undo that? How do you disarm that bomb? How do you reverse the order so that people are able to move away from it? Cognitive dissonance, the emotional response, the cycle of reruns again and again and again, and rug pulls again and again and again. I think that's what's happening. And I think we can take heart in that, even if that's not the plan somehow. It is still an effect, a very clear, visible, discernible effect out in the world that you can witness among people close to you, people who are just acquaintances, and strangers you might meet. Many people are going through that same process that leads eventually down the path where we need it to go.